Yeah, hello everybody. Yeah, welcome to a new JavaPro video. Today I have a special guest from Sweden, Ivar Grimstad. Thank you, Ivar, for your time. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's our pleasure actually. So, Ivar, maybe we can talk a little bit about yourself. So, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Ivar Grimstad. I'm the Jakarta EE Developer Advocate from Eclipse Foundation. And I usually travel around the world to give talks at conferences. This year, it's been more virtual, as all of us. I was also a speaker at JCON earlier this year. So, yeah, mostly I talk about Jakarta EE and Jakarta EE related stuff, and MicroProfile is one of the topics I also touch upon when I do talks.
Yeah, great. You're also a Java champion, and you're a leader of a Java user group in Sweden. Maybe
Yes.
you can tell us a little
Yes,
bit about
I'm running the local Java user groups in Malmö in Sweden called Java Forum. And as you said, I'm also a Java champion. I'm a member of the JCP Executive Committee as well. I used to be a individual member holding an associate seat, but since I joined the Eclipse Foundation, I'm their representative there. I'm also not very active, but I support the Apache NetBeans Project. So yeah, I'm involved here and there in the community. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, interesting. What's going on in the NetBeans project these days?
Oh, NetBeans, they are actually about to release a version 12.2 now. So they are, I think it's 2 releases per year. So they have, they really got everything up and running and it's functioning very well as an open source project there.
Yeah. And how was JCON for you, Ivar?
JCON was good. I was kind of impressed by how big it was, because there were so many tracks and so many talks going on, and it was almost as a regular conference, and but all virtual. And one thing I appreciated with JCON is that all talks were live.
Yeah.
Because many conferences these days are doing recorded talks. And often the organizers think that, okay, this is easier for the speakers. They don't have to worry about the internet connection and that kind of things. And to some degree, that is true. But on the other hand, in my experience, to record a talk takes so much more time than giving a talk. So for me, I actually prefer having the live experience and having questions directly coming from the audience, so I can have more of a dialogue there and kind of simulate the real experience.
Yeah, and you had a lot of participants in your session.
Yeah, it was great, and a lot of questions, and it was a good session, very well. Yeah.
Yeah, the topic of your session was end-to-end portable microservices with Eclipse MicroProfile. So for everybody who are not familiar with MicroProfile, or maybe they heard MicroProfile in every conference, but not really know exactly what it is. What is MicroProfile actually?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you both said Eclipse MicroProfile and MicroProfile, because I think the JCON talk was the first time in a very long time that you actually could just say MicroProfile, because it used to be a project at the Eclipse Foundation, and all projects at the Eclipse Foundation are called Eclipse something. But I think right about the time where JCON was, the working group for MicroProfile was established, and then they can get rid of the Eclipse prefix and just be MicroProfile. And I think this was the first talk I gave after that happened. So that was the name. Yeah, MicroProfile is a set of specifications. It builds on top of a couple of foundational Jakarta EE specifications, such as CDI, JSON-P, JSON-B, and JAX-RS or Jakarta REST. So these are the specifications that are the basis for creating the simplest microservice, which is usually a RESTful endpoint that produces some JSON. And on top of this, MicroProfile gives you a couple of APIs that makes it easier to create and hook into the infrastructure that you usually run microservices in, such as health checks. So you can have a liveness probe and readiness tests for if you're running Kubernetes, for example. And you can have metrics to monitor your service, security to propagate the tokens between your service endpoints. And there's a type-safe REST client to make it easier to do service-to-service calls. And what am I forgetting? Configuration, yeah, so you can configure your services at runtime from the environment it's running in. So there are lots of these extra features that are useful for creating microservices that MicroProfile provides for you.
Would you say that MicroProfile is a kind of like lightweight Java Enterprise or Jakarta EE, or lightweight version? So
that's one way of putting it. I would rather say it's a set of APIs that use the programming model and kind of you can leverage everything you know from Jakarta EE and get the microservice support for it. So it's not a subset of Jakarta EE. It's sort of an extension, but it's kind of going a little bit sideways. So it is using some of the APIs of Jakarta EE and adding something. What's interesting is also that most of the runtimes that support MicroProfile also support at least the web profile of Jakarta EE. So that means you can use much more of the Jakarta EE APIs than the 4 that is stipulated by MicroProfile. So in that sense, it becomes an addition to Jakarta EE.
Yes, this leads me to the next question. Which frameworks do MicroProfile implement?
Oh, for as I mentioned, you have the CDI for context and dependency injection. These are from Jakarta EE. Then you have JSON-P for JSON processing, JSON-B for JSON binding, and Jakarta REST or JAX-RS for creating RESTful endpoints. So these 4 APIs are required by MicroProfile from Jakarta EE. On top of these, they have 8 other APIs, and that is, let me see if I can remember all of them. You have metrics, health checks, Open API for documentation. You have the type-safe REST client. You have security or JSON Web Token propagation. Did I say configuration? And also tracing. And there's probably more, but they have 8 APIs on top of the 4 from Jakarta EE.
Yeah, maybe my question was not correctly. So I meant which frameworks out there, micro frameworks are MicroProfile providers. So there are maybe a little bit of confusing about these microservice frameworks out there. So there is Helidon, then they have flavors, Helidon MP and SE, and then we have Quarkus, we have Micronaut, and so on.
Yeah,
Spring Boot.
Okay.
So which frameworks do support MicroProfile, and what's actually the difference between these microservices frameworks? Maybe you can.
Yeah, sure. So
talk about
MicroProfile is just a set of specifications, and you have all these implementations of these specifications, and you have Open Liberty from IBM supports it. You have Payara Micro. You have Apache Tommy, and also, as you mentioned, Helidon, the MP version. So Helidon MP stands for Helidon MicroProfile. Hello on SE is a standard edition. It doesn't involve MicroProfile. And then you have Quarkus implements MicroProfile. And who am I forgetting? There are several more. Yeah, I don't have the list in front of me, but there are several of these implementations of it. You
Actually,
also mentioned Micronaut. That is supports. They provide some of the same features as MicroProfile does, but it's not related to MicroProfile in that sense. You can kind of say Spring Boot is also leveraging much of the same stuff that MicroProfile does, but it's a kind of a third option for creating microservices.
Yeah, it seems that all application servers actually now support MicroProfile, right?
Yeah, most of the Jakarta EE servers also implement MicroProfile specifications. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering is the old application server concept is this a dinosaur, and is MicroProfile now the future, or would you expect that both will exist in parallel in the future?
They will definitely exist both in parallel, and I think the way it's more of how we use these technologies. Like we used to have one big application service that we stuffed all our applications into and had all applications running in a single instance or a cluster of application servers. I think that's area. Many people are doing that still, but I think that's kind of the dinosaur we're talking about. You can have the Jakarta EE runtimes nowadays are so small that it makes much more sense to just deploy one application to one application server and stuff it into a container and run it in some container management system. And then it doesn't matter if it's a Jakarta EE runtime or a MicroProfile runtime, or if it supports both. You just use whatever you need. But to deploy a lot of applications into an application server, that's probably not the way to go these days. So one app, one server in one container.
This is very interesting. Yes, this is a very important point, I think. Interesting for all developers because of this confusing in this architecture questions. In the when we talk about microservices, and we often hear the 12-factor concept. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this concept. What is a 12-factor microservice?
Yeah, so the 12 factors are 12 characteristics that if you follow, it's not all just technical things. There are different things. It should be, I can't remember all 12 of them, but I'll take a couple of them. One of them is that a service should be configurable from the outside. So that means, for example, the MicroProfile configuration that implements the externalized configuration microservice pattern, and that kind of makes a service to be configurable without having to rebuild it. Another of the 12 factor is that I think it's your source should be in source control, which makes sense, and everybody has things in source control these days. So the different factors are kind of characteristics that characterizes a microservice, and MicroProfile implements or supports you in a lot of these.
And what do you think, has the Java community already understood the concept of microservices in deep? So there are many developers are discussing this topic. Is this microservices concept really suited for our approach, or should we decide to develop a monolith, or should we split our monolith in 3 modules or 4 modules? So what is the best approach What do you think?
So if I had the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. I would be sitting somewhere else and just counting my money. So I think that the boring answer to this is it depends. So if in some cases microservices would be the perfect approach for you, but in other cases it would just add complexity and make it more difficult, because it's not simple, because you add a lot of network stuff and all these and to kind of manage all these services, where you may just be fine with having a more monolithic approach. So I think none of them are the silver bullet we're looking for. It's it depends on the situation, and in many cases I think it could be a good idea to look, if you have a monolith, to look at it and see, does it make sense to split this up? And one thing you can look at is, if you have some parts of this monolith that maybe handles one domain of your system, like if you have a user service or a shopping cart service or something like that, and this maybe the updates to this is more frequent than others, so it makes sense to have a different development cycle for it, and then that could be a reason to split it out to its own service, so you don't have to redeploy your entire thing just because you make changes to this particular service. Another case would be if some of parts of your application are having scalability issues, then it may make sense to split this out and have more instances of it. Whereas other parts of your application are just humming on no resources at all, and maybe don't need this scalability. So I think you have to look at each application by itself and see how you can slice it up if you want to go there.
Does this decision also depend on the size of the developer team? So would you recommend, hey guys, if you are not at least 30 person in your team, then do not use the microservice approach, or is this independent from the size of the team?
I mean, that's a factor as well, but I don't think that's the biggest factor. I think a 30-person development team is probably a little bit too big anyway. So you probably divide it into smaller teams in smaller chunks of functionality. And then it may make sense that this team is managing the whole life cycle of their part of the system. If that is one service or a couple of services, that's more up to the architecture than not. But that's easier to manage than if you have to coordinate everything to get the big deployment going.
Okay, interesting. What do you think? How does the new projects Valhalla and Loom influence MicroProfile?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think on the short term that it will affect it that much, really. I think Loom may, then we're talking about fibers, right? And I think maybe fibers will have more impact on system using the reactive approach. But not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily mean that much. So I think that time will show more or less what happens there.
Okay. Let's talk about the development process. So the Java Enterprise process, it was always a little bit slow. It seemed it is very slow. So Spring was always leading with new features, and now we have the Jakarta EE at the Eclipse Foundation. Is the process now faster? And in comparison to MicroProfile, which one is faster in the development process? would you say?
Well, that is actually a good question, because now that MicroProfile has moved into the Eclipse Foundation as a working group, they have established their own specification process, which is the MicroProfile specification process. And if you take it line by line and compare it to Jakarta EE specification process, it's more or less identical. Mm-hmm. So the process doesn't say anything about how fast it can go. It has these, both of them are a derivative of the Eclipse Foundation specification process. And there are some constraints to how long the review periods need to be. And that is because the most important thing of the specification process is to secure the IP, the intellectual property. And since there are big companies involved here, their legal departments usually need a little bit of time. So that's why these reviews are never less than 7 days, and usually are 14 days. And that's just to give these big companies the opportunity or the possibility to do the legal work. Technically, the processes are exactly the same. And MicroProfile will soon, or in January, I think, release 4.0. That's their first version using this process. And Jakarta EE has just released Jakarta EE 9. And that's our second release of that process. And Jakarta EE came about a year after Jakarta EE 8. And in early next year, we will release Jakarta EE 9.1. And later that year, maybe 9.2 or even 10. That depends on what functionality we put into it. MicroProfile usually releases 3 times a year. So if Jakarta EE releases 1 to 2 times a year and MicroProfile 3 times a year, it's more or less the same. So the processes are more or less identical. It's the same people involved, and the cadence just it's more of a practical decision. How often do you want to put out these things?
And what's on the agenda? What's coming next? So are there new exciting things, features?
So I can mostly speak for Jakarta EE, and the Jakarta EE 9 release that are coming out, or just came out a couple of weeks ago, and will be celebrated on December 8th next week on Jakarta One livestream. Contains the namespace change from JavaX to Jakarta, which is a major industry impact. Everybody is affected by this. Everybody has to change its namespace. Even Spring Framework has to do some work here to support the new namespace. And that is why we decided not to deliver any new functionality there, because we want to give people the opportunity to do this namespace big bang approach, switch, and then innovate. So what will happen after 9 or after 9.1 next year, it's up to the community to deliver what they want to deliver. And I think one of the major wishes of the community is to leverage CDI more. So maybe EJBs will stop to be developed very much further, or just be incrementally done and replaced by counterparts in CDI. There will most certainly be a CDI Lite version, which could be a subset of CDI, which enables ahead of time compilation. And that makes interesting for frameworks like Quarkus and Helidon, that you can use to compile to native images on GraalVM. And so to kind of isolate the dynamic aspects of CDI out from the light profile. So that is maybe the biggest shift coming up in next Jakarta EE versions. And that will benefit MicroProfile as well. Then the other specifications are, it's all about simplification and making things easier for developers. So I would just encourage people to go into Jakarta.ee, find the mailing list there, go into the projects and see what's going on, because this is now the work will start to define the future.
Sounds good. Is it now easier to get involved and to contribute to the project in comparison to the former JCP process?
Well, the JCP process was always open for people to participate, but once an expert group had formed, it was kind of set for that JSR or specification request. So you could always contribute to the discussions and so, but to be part of an expert group, you usually needed to be there in the beginning. With Jakarta EE, you can join at any time because we don't have the expert groups. It's open source projects. So just as with any open source project, it's based on how much you contribute. And if you are a contributor by sending pull requests or filing issues or discussing on mail lists, sooner or later, somebody will probably recommend you to become a committer. And then you suddenly have commit rights and are in the middle of it. So to contribute, the only thing you need to do is to create an account at Eclipse Foundation and sign the Eclipse contributor agreement, which is a simple document. And that's it. Then you can send pull requests and contribute. So it's very easy to join. There are no time constraints when to join. It's just like any open source project.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, thank you, Ivar, for your time. It was very interesting and it was great to have you at JCON and for this interview. I appreciate. Yeah, and if you liked our video, then please subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for your time. Have a good day.
Yeah, same to you. Bye.
Bye.